Okay, so the first thing you guys want to do is open up the project browser, which automatically starts when opening UEFN. Then we go to Future Templates, we open the first devices starter and we give it a name. Then we head over to Window, Content Browser, open up the first one. Then we see in Creative Devices, Hello World device. We insert it into our game. What this will do is it will run the code when you start the game. When you click on Verse, you will automatically open the code editor. Inside the Visual Studio Code, you can see we have our own Hello World device file. In this file, you can see a new Hello World device is being declared. Inside of the onBegin function is the code that will execute when the game is started. If we want to check whether our values are being printed, we have to go back into the Unreal editor. In here, press Launch Session. This will prompt your Fortnite game into opening your world. In here, you can press Start Game. And when it's started, you can open your inventory and press Log. Here you can see the exact values that we added. Now let's start by rewriting the onBegin function. I suggest you write with me and change values on the way, so you have a better understanding of how programming concepts work. In order to write something into the console, we have to use a print statement. Every time you change code, you have to go back into the Unreal editor. Here you can press Push Changes. This will prompt your game to do a reload. It will restart the game and apply the updated code. This time you will notice that the log looks a bit different. This is because whenever you push changes in the Unreal editor, it will send some data, telling you if the changes were a success. On the bottom line you can see that our edited code has been updated successfully. Now that we have learned how to print any text into the log, let's try and add some logic to it. What I will do now is make two constants, called A and B. In our print function, we will add these two together. This will give us an expected output of 3. A is the name of our constant. Int stands for integer, is our data type. We give it a value, in this case 1. B we give a value of 2. And as you can see, it prints the expected output value of 3. We will now go over some data types to see what they do and how we can use them in our project. Feel free to ride along. Okay, so back into our program, we will go over some of the most common data types, including int. Int stands for integer, and you can only equal it to a round number. If we want our constant to equal to a decimal number, we will have to use a different data type. The most common one to use is float. As you can see, we get an error. This is because you cannot add two different data types. We can simply fix this by renaming the data type of our other constant. So the difference between a float and an integer is a float can only contain a decimal number. If we try to make it a round number, it will give us an error. This also goes for the other way around. We cannot give an integer a decimal value, because this will prompt an error. Another common data type to use is a string. A string contains text, and whenever we write text, we have to put it into quotes. We can now edit our print function accordingly. When we push changes again and start the game, we get the value of the string printed into our log. The difference between a constant and a variable is that you cannot edit the value of a constant when your program is running. To create a variable, Simply type var before your constant. Now we can edit this variable using set. This will now print text 2. When we remove the var keyword, you can see we get an error. This is because you cannot edit the value of a constant during runtime of the program. Now let's add conditions to our code. I will create two variables, called number1 and number2. If we want to check if number1 is less than number2, we can use an if statement. We can say if number1 is less than number2, print number1 is less. Else, if number2 is less than number1, then number2 is less. And at the end we can say, if none of the above is true, then they must be equal. So we can say number1 is equal to number2. When we edit the values of our variables, the program will print something else into the log. For example, in this case, it will print number2 is less. If we change it to 1, it will print number1 is less. If we make them equal, it will print number1 is equal to number2. Because the first programming language works with code blocks, you have to add 4 spaces between the statement and the code to be executed when the statement is true. If we do not do this, we will get an error in our following statement. Another common data type that gets used in if statements is the logic data type. Experienced programmers may see that this is a Boolean data type. The logic data type can only have one of two values, true or false. Let's create an example of the logic data type used in an if statement. So we start by asking the log new cows drink milk. In the if statement, we will give an answer depending on the value of our logic data type. The question mark in the if statement basically asks if our logic variable is true. If it is, it will execute the following code. If it's not true, it will execute this code. We can delete the question mark and write equals true to get the same effect. Let's go back to our previous if statement. Imagine we have 100 numbers that need to be compared to each other. We do not have to write 100 of those if statements. We can simply write it in one function. To write a function, let's start by giving it a name. We also have to assign a data type to the function. In our case, this will be a string, because we want the function to tell which number is smaller. In this function we can now type our previous code, so we only have to call the function once to access the code. And now everything is wet. This is because we cannot put this function inside of this function, so we have to put it out here. Now everything is still wet because whenever we create a function with a data type, we have to return something that matches that data type. So instead of typing print here, we return it. And now the numbers still have a red line under them. And that is because you cannot use variables from another function in a new function. So we can fix this by writing something called a parameter. And a parameter is basically a variable that is only usable in a function itself. So once again, we write down a number and the data type. And we do this for both numbers. In here we will give these numbers new names. And here all we have to do is type our print function, call the function, and then instead of the number 1 parameters, we write our own created variables. So this is AB, and in here this is BC. So in this function, number 1, the first parameter, will be replaced by distance AB, which value holds 5. So this will return number 1 is smaller. So in our case here, it will print number 1 is smaller into the log. But as you can see here, we changed the name from number 1 to distance AB. So it would make more sense to only print the value. We can do that by adding curly brackets. And now instead of the name number 1, its value will be placed into the log. I told you guys before that in a function we always have to return something based on the data type. This is not exactly true. We can introduce a new type here, named void. And a function of type void, we do not need to return anything. We can say print here instead of return and remove it here. This will now do the exact same as our previous code. Now let's create some code that will actually do something in our game instead of just writing to the log. Okay, so what just happened here? I will first run the program so you can see for yourself what it does. After that, I will explain in more detail what this code exactly does. In the game, whenever we spawn, we instantly get 15 damage. Okay, so how does this work? At first, I added 2 module files that are both in the Fortnite digest file. In a future tutorial, we can go over the different modules in detail. For now, all we need to know is that they exist and we can use them. At first, I created a new function called DamagePlayer, which takes one parameter, which has a data type of a float. The function doesn't return anything, hence the void. We create a playspace called playspace from the Fortnite playspace. The fourth playspace is actually something that is included in the playspaces module. If we control click on it, we will go to the Fortnite digest first file and we can see that it's in the playspaces module, which we included by this path. As I said before, we will go over this in the future in more detail. For now, we only need to know that it exists. Back into our Hello World device file, let's continue reviewing our code. Here we declare a constant called allPlayers that takes an array of the data type player. Here it gets all the players that are in the playspace, so basically everyone that's in the game. We continue with an if statement that declares a constant called first player. The first player will look through all the players that are in the play space and gets the first player. Then in the next if statement, we will get the character of that first player. The get Fortnite character is also part of the Fortnite digest file, which we will not look into that deeply. In the last line of our function, we damage the character by the damage amount that is declared in the parameter. In the onBegin function, we damage the player by 15. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you guys is how to assign a value from the Unreal Editor to a constant. First, we will create our constant in the Hello World device, and we will call it damage to take by player. It will be a float, of course, and we will give it a value of 0. We will replace this in the DamagePlayer parameters, and what we can do now is add an @ sign and then press editable. What will happen now is when we open our Unreal Editor, go to build first code, then go to Window, Details, Details 1, click on your Hello World device, and you can see we have our constant here, and we can give it a value. Let's get 40 for example. And now when we start the game, we will take 40 damage. And that will be all for our fundamentals video. Thank you for watching, and subscribe for future content.